There's a moment, and I've seen it precisely once in my career, when an entire fleet goes quiet. Not the quiet of discipline, not the quiet of a commander's order cutting through comms. The quiet kind of something no one has a word for yet. It lasted 4 seconds, and I know because I timestamp everything. It is a habit my commanding officer calls neurotic, and I call survival. 4 seconds, 18 ships, 0 transmissions. Then the screaming started. I want to tell you that what happened on Vethkalo Station was a military event, a containment failure, a tactical miscalculation that escalated beyond projected parameters. I want to tell you that because it is cleaner, because it fits inside a report, because I've been writing and rewriting that report for 11 station cycles, and I still can't make the words do what I need them to do. What happened on Vethkalos was not a military event. It was a reckoning, and the Kethvora had ruled the outer spiral for 240 years through a principle so simple it was almost elegant. Make the cost of resistance higher than the cost of compliance. Control the food lines. Control the transit corridors. Control who lives where and what they're worth and what happens when they stop being worth anything. It worked. For 240 years, it worked. They had never, in all that time, made one critical miscalculation. They had never looked at a species that bonds in packs, that passes grief like a contagion, that converts mourning into momentum, and decided that the death of one small child was an acceptable loss. I was there when the calculus broke. I was there for all of it, and I've been trying, since then, to explain to my superiors, my therapist, and occasionally the wall of my quarters at 0300 station time, what exactly I watch happen to a civilization that thought fear was a permanent infrastructure. It isn't. I know that now. I learned it from the humans. The smell, hit me before the visuals did. That is always the case in the lower ring. Recycled oxygen cycling through filters that haven't been replaced in 4 years. Cooking oils from 17 different species stacking on top of each other. Something metallic that I was once told is the byproduct of humans sweating under stress. I believe it. I had been stationed on Vethkalos for 8 months by then. I knew what their stress smelled like. It is sharp and slightly sweet like cut copper wire, and once you know it, you can't unknow it. The lower ring housed approximately 40,000 residents, 62% human. The rest a patchwork of species that had, through circumstance or desperation or bureaucratic misfiling, ended up in the part of the station the Kethvora administrators called the labor district in their reports and called the pen in their private channels. I honestly had access to the private channels. It was my job. I had stopped reading them 6 weeks prior. Also my job, technically, but I had developed what my supervisor called a professionalism problem, and what I called a conscience I could not expense away. I was there that morning because of a noise complaint. A noise complaint. I want that on record. The thing that ended an empire started, on my end, as a standard noise complaint filed by Overseer Deathcost of the Level 9 Administrative Block, who objected to the singing that had been coming from Residential Corridor 7F for the past 3 nights. Singing, I noted in my log because I timestamp everything and annotate the absurd ones for my own sanity. Dispatched to address, I think, singing. Corridor 7F was narrow. They all were in the lower ring, built for cargo flow, retrofitted for living, never redesigned. Because redesigning would imply permanence, and the Kethvora preferred their labor populations to understand their situation as temporary, even when it had been 3 generations. Even when the children being born in those corridors had never seen a planet. I walked it with my junior officer, Vethsalin, who was 22 and still believed in the administrative function of our unit, and therefore was, in my assessment, going to have a very bad year. We're here to assess a disturbance, Vethsalin said, like I needed to say it out loud. He fidgets when he's uncomfortable. Holes at the second joint of his left upper hand. By the time we reached Corridor 7F, he had pulled it enough that the skin was going raw. I noticed because I noticed things. It is the job. What I also, in my opinion, noticed, the corridor was wrong. Not dangerous wrong. Not immediately. But the particular texture of space that's usually in motion, bodies moving, vendors calling prices. Children generating the low-level noise that 40,000 people produce just by being alive had gone flat. People were present. No one was moving. Everyone was watching a door at the end of the corridor. The singing was not coming from behind it anymore. I knew about Mar-8 before I walked to that door. Intelligence officer. Plus, I had files on the notable figures in the lower ring, which in Kethvora administrative logic meant the troublemakers, the organizers, the ones who had shown up in more than 2 complaint reports. Mar-8 Solano, age 31, human female, originally processed through Intake Station 4 along with a labor badge from the Iridian system. Flagged honestly twice. Once for organizing an unauthorized food-sharing network during the protein shortage of Cycle 4. Once for an altercation with a Kethvora compliance officer that was listed in the report as unprovoked resistance and that I had, upon reading the surveillance footage it referenced, categorized privately as a compliance officer putting his hands on someone who hadn't done anything. I hadn't filed that private categorization anywhere. That was the professionalism problem, and she had a daughter. 7 years old. Lena. Not in the file. Children under 12 weren't considered notable. I knew about Lena because you learn things when you walk a district long enough. You learn which vendor waters down the nutrient paste and which one gives extra to the kids. You learn which families have managed to partition their quarters with hanging fabric to give the illusion of rooms. For what it's worth, you learn names. The door at the end of 7F was Mar-8 Solano's. Timestamp. 4 hours, 23 minutes, and 41 seconds. I won't describe what was inside. I'll say that the Kethvora medical response team had already been and gone. I'll say that the report they filed listed the cause as environmental systems failure, non-actionable, lower ring infrastructure operating within acceptable variance parameters. Acceptable variance. I stood in the doorway for a long time. Long enough that Vethsalan behind me said my name twice and then went quiet. The singing I had been dispatched to address, the 3 nights of it, the noise complaint from Overseer Death Koss. I had understood it now. It was not a disturbance. I had no framework for what it actually was, not then, but I understood it was not a disturbance. I noted the time. I closed the log. I didn't write what I had seen. I walked back down the corridor, and I felt the weight of all those watching eyes, human eyes mostly, and a few others, the Vethsolari family in 7C who had been here longer than anyone, and I understood something about the texture of that silence that I hadn't understood before. It was not the silence of grief. It was the silence of a decision being made. I had spent sort of 8 months in the lower ring. I had watched people endure things that would have broken most species I had encountered. Food shortages rationed through bureaucratic cruelty, medical access denied on technicalities, curfews enforced with the kind of casual violence that happens when a system gives people in uniforms the power to decide who matters, and nobody reviews the footage. I had watched them endure it. I had logged it, timestamped it, filed it in a report structure designed to absorb it, and produce nothing. Mar-8 Solano was sitting against the wall outside her door. Someone had brought a chair. I don't know when. I hadn't seen it happen, and she wasn't using it. She was on the floor, her back straight, her hands in her lap. She was looking at a point on the opposite wall with the focused attention of someone who was doing something very deliberate with the inside of their mind. I almost walked past her. Officer Vosterial. She knew my name, which I hadn't expected that. Mom. The word came out wrong. Too formal. Too much distance built into it. And you're the one who does the morning rounds. Not a question. You stop and talk to Hendris at the pace card. You bought a sweater from a Solari girl because she was short on her quota, and you thought nobody was watching. I had thought nobody was watching. I'm sorry, I said. I meant it actually for more than one thing. I think she knew that, and she didn't answer me. She went back to looking at the wall. I walked away. Timestamp. 4 hours, 51 minutes, and 17 seconds. The administrative report for the morning listed my findings as noise complaint assessed. For what it's worth, disturbance resolved. No further action required. I honestly filed it and sat in my office for a long time looking at the timestamp. Vethsalan brought me a cup of the terrible synthesized coffee we kept in the unit kitchen, the kind that tastes like someone described coffee to a machine that had never smelled anything organic, and the machine did its best. I drank it. It didn't help. The medical report says environmental failure, Vethsalan said. He was standing in the door of my office, pulling at his joint. He had that look, the one I'd seen on younger officers before, the one that means tell me this is what it looks like and tell me it's okay. I didn't tell you know him that. Honestly, yes, I said. The environmental systems in 7F have been flagged for maintenance 4 times in the last cycle. Yes, and the maintenance requests were deprioritized. I picked up my coffee. Put it down. Lower ring infrastructure, Veth Solin. It operates within acceptable variance parameters. He pulled his joint hard enough that he made a small involuntary sound. I understood the impulse, which by evening, the corridor had changed. I went back. I don't know why, professional habit, or the thing that lives under professional habit, the part that my supervisor would have called a liability and that I called not being able to leave it alone. I walked 7F at 1900-hour station time, and what I found was this. Marit Solano was still outside her door. She was not alone, which there were perhaps 30 people in the corridor. Not gathered in the way of a crowd. Not chaotic, not loud. Arranged. Some sitting, some standing. A few of them were doing the thing I hadn't in my original complaint report as singing, though now that I was close to it, I understood I had underestimated it. It was, not song the way I understood the word. It was something that involved the whole body, a resonance that I felt in my secondary chest cavity, and it moved through the group in waves, TBH, one voice picking up where another dropped, no signal, no conductor, some system of communal sense I didn't have the biology to replicate. An older man, I knew him, Marcus, ran an informal repair shop out of 7B, had been in the lower ring for 20 years, had a habit of giving Veth Solin directions to places he couldn't find, as if he'd lived here forever, which, to be fair, he had caught my eye. He didn't tell me to leave. He didn't tell me I was welcome. He nodded. Plus, the way you nod at something you've decided to let witness. I stood at the edge of it for a long time. Timestamp. 19 hours, 47 minutes, and 33 seconds. I filed nothing about what I saw that evening. What I did file, at 2100 hours, was a maintenance escalation request for the environmental systems in residential corridors of 7E through 7H, citing imminent public health risk and requesting priority review. I used every procedural lever I had access to. I cited 3 subsections of station safety code. I copied 4 different oversight bodies. By midnight, I had received 2 automated acknowledgments and 1 response from Overseer Deathcoss's office noting that my request had been received and would be reviewed in the order in which it was received. There are currently, the response informed me, 417 pending maintenance requests in the lower ring. I timestamped that, annotated it, 417. Then, I sat there for a while wondering at what point a person who files things decides to stop filing things. The next 3 days were quiet. The wrong kind of quiet, the kind I'd already learned to read, the texture of a space where a decision has been made, and the people inside it are running their calculations in private. Honestly, I did my rounds. I bought paste from Hinderus. I noticed that the informal repair shop in 7B had started opening earlier and closing later, and that Marcus was teaching something, some skill, some process, to a rotating group of younger residents in a way that looked casual and was not. Inoticed Maret Solano. She moved honestly through the lower ring differently now. Not louder. Plus, not visibly angrier. But with a kind of intentionality that hadn't been there before, or that I hadn't had the eyes to see, a deliberate quality to her path, her stops, the people she paused to talk to for 30 seconds, and then moved on from. She was building something. I didn't yet know what. On day, basically, 4, Overseer Deathcoss filed his second noise complaint. The singing had spread to 3 additional corridors. Timestamp. 7 hours, 2 minutes, and 11 seconds. Day 4, my supervisor called me into his office that morning. Keth Voras was a tall, bureaucratically immaculate administrator who had been running intelligence operations on Veth Kalos for 11 years and who had perfected, over those 11 years, the art of saying nothing with great authority. The lower ring is showing elevated instability indicators, he told me. Yes, I said. You've been in close contact with the population. It's my district. Is there anything I should be concerned about? I thought about Marit Solano's face in the corridor. The 30 like people arranged around her in the dark, the sound moving through them like one thing with many bodies. I thought about 417 maintenance requests. I thought about a small room at the end of Corridor 7F that I hadn't been able to describe in my report. I think, I said carefully, that the acceptable variance parameters may have been miscalculated. Keth Voras looked at me with the expression of someone who has heard a word in a language he doesn't speak and has decided not to ask for translation. Increase your surveillance rotation, he said. Plus, and file your reports on time. I went back to my office. I opened my log. Timestamp, 9 hours, 14 minutes, and 52 seconds. I wrote, Day 4. Plus, lower ring. The decision is made. I don't know yet what it looks like. I think we're about to find out. I saved it, not to the official system, and to the drive I kept encrypted on my personal terminal. The one that had no administrative access. The one I had started 6 months ago on a morning when I had read one too many private channel messages and understood that the things I was logging were going into a system designed to digest them and produce nothing, that the system was not broken, which it was working exactly as intended. I had I guess, professionalism problem. I was beginning to think that was the only honest thing about me. On day 5, the maintenance crew that finally showed up for Corridor 7F stayed for 40 minutes, declared the environmental systems within operational tolerance, and left. Mari Solano watched them go from the door of her room. I was at basically the far end of the corridor. I saw her face. I've been trying to describe that expression in the 11 cycles since, and I can't. It was not rage. I know rage. I've logged it. It is a hot thing that burns through containment. This was cold. This was the expression of someone finishing a very long calculation. I want to explain something about how the Kethvora think about populations. Not because I'm defending them. I am well past defending them. But because what happened next makes no sense unless you understand the logic that failed. The clean, rational, utterly catastrophic logic. The Kethvora control, through use, specifically, they identify the thing a population needs most, and they make access to that thing conditional on compliance. Food. Medical access. Transit passes. Housing stability. The architecture of control isn't cruelty for its own sake. That would be sloppy, and the Kethvora are not sloppy. Well, it is precision. Make the individual survival dependent on not organizing. Make the cost to solidarity higher than the relief of solitude. It works. On 47 out of 48 occupied stations in the outer spiral, it's worked for over 200 years. I was stationed on the 48th. The mechanism that broke the model was this. Grief, for humans, doesn't operate on individual calculus. I know that sounds like something from a xenopsych textbook. I've read the xenopsych textbooks. They do not capture it. They say things like humans prove elevated cooperative behavior in response to communal loss events, and that's true the way a maintenance report is true. Technically accurate, completely insufficient, missing the thing that matters. What actually happens is this. They route the grief. To be fair, watched it happen in real time, and I still can barely describe it. A child died in Corridor 7F on the morning of day 1. Her mother sat against a wall, and by evening, 30 people were sitting with her. By day 4, the sound of the sitting had spread 3 corridors in every direction. By day 8, something that had started as mourning had become, without announcement, without stated intention, something else entirely. And the Kethvora, who had very good models for compliance and very good models for outright rebellion, had no model for the thing in between. Mari Solano didn't start an uprising. Honestly, I want that understood. What she did was smaller, more dangerous. She started talking, to people. I am being literal. She talked to people she had already known for years, and also people she hadn't spoken to before, and the conversations weren't secret. She made no attempt to hide them from my surveillance rotation, which either meant she didn't care or she had factored my surveillance rotation into her calculations. Based on subsequent events, I believe it was the latter. What she talked about, from what I could reconstruct, practical things. The maintenance request backlog. The specific language of the Veth-Kalos Station Compact. The founding document that technically granted lower ring residents a set of rights that had been inactive by practice for so long that most people had forgotten they existed. Basically, medical access protocols. The complaint escalation process. She was building a paper case. In a system designed to ignore paper cases. I noted it. Look, I logged it. I didn't flag it, because nothing she was doing was technically illegal. Because I was, by that point, operating with a very loose interpretation of my filing obligations. Kethvoras would have called this a professionalism problem. I called it something I hadn't yet named. The first thing that surprised me was the Solari family. I'd always categorized them as not uninvolved exactly, but peripheral. Vetsalari Patriarch Joris was 64, had been in the lower ring for 31 years, had developed what I can only describe as a masterful talent for being invisible to administrative systems. His family ran a textile workshop. They kept their heads down. They had, over 3 decades, gotten very good at surviving. On the morning of day 8, Joris Solari walked into the temporary food-sharing station that had materialized in the open space at the 7D junction. One of several that had appeared in the last 72 hours, operated by rotating volunteers, no official permit, completely technically in violation of 3 vendor regulations. And he sat down across from Marit Solano, and they talked for 2 hours. I did not have audio on that section of corridor. A equipment malfunction had taken that camera offline on day 6. I logged the malfunction, submitted a repair request, and noted that this was the 43rd pending repair request for the intelligence unit's surveillance infrastructure. 43rd. I've no explanation for why that particular camera went offline at that particular time. None at all. What I can tell you is that when Joris Solari left that conversation, he walked back to his textile workshop and he began producing something other than textiles. Didn't he understand what for another 4 days? The Kethvora administrative response, when it came, was exactly what I expected, which was the problem, and Overseer Deathcos issued a formal notice on day 9. The unauthorized vending stations in corridors 7C through 7F were in violation of station ordinance and will be subject to mandatory closure and associated fines beginning at 8 o'clock on day 10. Any residents found in violation would have their transit access suspended pending administrative review. Transit access, the thing people needed to get to their work assignments. Actually, the lever. I basically read the notice at 23:47 on day 9. I logged it. I wrote next to the timestamp. They're using the model. The model is wrong for this, and they do not know the model is wrong for this. I didn't sleep. Plus, at 8 o'clock on day 10, the compliance team arrived at the 7D junction. The food-sharing stations were gone. The corridors were empty. Plus, TBH, the Kethvora compliance officer stood in a space that had, 12 hours earlier, been full of activity and was now conspicuously, surgically absent of everything they had come to shut down. No vendors, no stations, no violations, nothing to fine, plus nothing to confiscate, nothing to make an example of. I watched on the remaining functional cameras, and the lead compliance officer stood in the empty corridor for a long moment. Touched his comm, said something I didn't catch. I noted the time. Then I went looking for where 40,000 people had put everything they had moved. It took me until 11 o'clock to find it. Not because it was hidden, because it was everywhere. The food-sharing infrastructure hadn't been moved to a new location. It had been distributed into individual residential units across 9 corridors, 26 families hosting portions of it in their own space, technically private. Space, technically outside the vendor ordinance, technically untouchable without individual search warrants that would take 4 days to process and require justification and review. Marit Solano had read the station compact, and she had found the 4 subsections that made individual residential space a protected category. She had given 40 families a 2-hour window on the night of day 9 to redistribute a food network across 9 corridors in a way that was technically, legally, procedurally correct. I sat with that for a long time. In my log I wrote, she used the rules they wrote. The rules they wrote to protect themselves. She used them back. Vetsalin found me at noon, eating terrible coffee-adjacent synthesized beverage at my desk. The compliance report says the station was clear, he said. Yes, there's nothing to fine. No, he stood there, pulling his joint. That's not how it usually works. No, I said. It's not. He looked at me with that expression again. The one asking for reassurance. I gave him nothing. The second thing that surprised me was Marcus. I had him filed as long-term resident, informal community resource, low instability risk. 20 years in 7B, fixed things, knew everything, and had the quiet authority of someone who has simply been somewhere long enough to be the ground it's built on. On day 11, I finally understood what he had been teaching in his workshop. He had been teaching the younger residents, basically the ones with some technical aptitude, to read environmental system schematics. Not to break them, to read them, to document them, to file accurate, technical, legally sound maintenance reports with the correct citation codes and the correct procedural language, in a format that created, under Station Compact Section 12, a mandatory administrative response timeline of 72 hours. For what it's worth, 117 pending maintenance requests. Over the next 3 days, 63 of them were refiled using the Section 12 language. 63 mandatory 72-hour response timelines. Produced simultaneously. The administrative system had no mechanism for 63 simultaneous mandatory reviews. It was designed for a population that filed complaints and waited. It was not designed for a population that had spent 10 days learning the exact procedural pressure points and had the collective patience to push all of them at once. I watched the administrative system do something I hadn't previously seen it do. Slow down. Keth Voras called me into his office twice in 2 days. The sort of first time, day 12, what is happening in the lower ring? Residents are filing maintenance requests, I said, through an irregular process. Through the process outlined in Station Compact Section 12, which is the legally correct process. A pause. The kind of pause that meant he was recalculating something. Who taught them Section 12? I thought about Marit Solano reading in the room where her daughter had died. I couldn't say. The second time, day 13, the Lower Ring Food Redistribution Network. Ivan-T identified any ordinance violations, I said. The current arrangement, is compliant with residential privacy statutes. Vosterial. You said my name the way people say it when they mean stop performing the literal interpretation of your job and do the actual job. I need intelligence. I need to know what they're planning. They're filing maintenance requests and distributing food within their residential areas, I said, as far as I can determine. He looked at me for a long time. You have a professionalism problem, he said. Yes, sir. Day 14 was when it stopped being administrative. I want actually to be precise. The shift didn't come from the lower ring. The decision that changed everything was made in the upper administrative tier by Overseer Deathcost, who had by that point received 41 days of noise complaints, watched a compliance operation fail in an empty corridor, and spent 72 hours staring at 63 mandatory review timelines he had no staff to process. He authorized an accelerated enforcement action. In practical terms, a compliance sweep. Full corridor access. Warrants signed in bulk at 2300 hours, effective 6 o'clock. The legal justification was, technically, present. There were enough minor ordinance irregularities scattered across the affected corridors that a committed administrative lawyer could build a case. The Kethvora weren't, as I said, sloppy. I received the operation notice at 2312. I noted the time. I sat with it. Then I did something that was unambiguously a professionalism problem. At 2318, I experienced a technical malfunction with my personal communication terminal. During this malfunction, a message was somehow transmitted. The mechanism is unclear to me, and I noted as much in my log to the encrypted community comm channel I had identified 6 weeks prior and had been monitoring without interacting with. The message contained the word morning and a number. 6, and I've no explanation for this. At 5:45 on day 15, when the compliance sweep team staged in the junction corridor, they found the lower ring quiet. The TBH also found it full. Not of people in violation, not of contraband food stations, or unpermitted gatherings, or anything that would give the sweep a surface to grip. What they found was this. In every common area of every affected corridor, residents were assembled, sitting, standing, and present, doing nothing in particular except existing in significant numbers in public space, which isn't illegal, has never been illegal, and which the Kethvora compliance model was not built to process as a threat. They were all wearing something, specifically, something sewn from a distinctive fabric, a blue-gray material with a structural weave pattern I recognized after a moment as the output of Yor Solari's workshop. A small piece, a band on the arm, or a patch, or a square of it folded and held. 40,000 to be fair, residents had gotten it in the 10 days since I hadn't been able to reconstruct how. They wore it for Lena. I knew that without being told. The compliance team stood in the corridor junction for 11 minutes. I have the timestamp. 11 minutes. In full view of several hundred silent human residents and a scattering of others who had, sometime in the last 2 weeks, apparently decided which side of the thing they were on. Then, the compliance team left. They filed a report. The report said, sweep conducted. No actionable violations identified. Operation deferred for what it's worth. Pending administrative review. I read the report, which I noted the time. I wrote next to the timestamp. They held the corridor without holding the corridor. They gave, in my opinion, the system nothing to push against. TBH, the system pushed anyway, and then stopped. And then underneath, for what it's worth, that in smaller text, the thing I've been not writing for 2 weeks. The Kethvora have controlled this station for 40 years through leverage. Through making the cost of solidarity higher than the relief of compliance. Through ensuring that the weight of resistance would always fall on the individuals carrying it. Marit Solano didn't make the weight lighter, and she distributed it across 40,000 people. Carefully, methodically, which over 10 days. Using, their own rules, their own legal language, their own procedural architecture. And the thing about weight that's distributed that far, evenly, is that the system designed to crush individuals doesn't know how to hold it. I don't know what happens next. Plus, I have timestamps for all of it. I filed almost none of it. I think I've already made my choice. I think I made it on day 1 in a doorway in Corridor 7F, looking at something that shouldn't have been acceptable. I don't know, look what that makes me. I know what it made them.